There's a number in Russia's war math that made me stop and read it twice, because the first time I assumed it was a typo, but it wasn't. And once you see it, Russia's entire war equation stops making sense. Not just the losses are big, you know the losses are big. You've been hearing that for 4 years, and honestly, that's exactly why nobody noticed when the numbers did something they had never done in this entire war. They crossed. I'm not telling you which numbers yet, but when we get there, you're going to understand why the people who tracked this war for a living quietly changed their tone in the summer of 2026. Hi everyone, and welcome back to The Domino Effect, the channel where we map the wars, the weapons, and the power struggles shaping our world, one falling domino at a time. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today we're going inside the mathematics of the Russia-Ukraine war. 6 dominoes stacked up over 4.5 years that ended with a superpowers war equation producing results no military model predicted. We've read the reports so you don't have to, and I'll tell you up front, the answer to this one is not on the battlefield. Let's get into it. Every war underneath the flags and the speeches runs on the same brutal arithmetic. How much can you lose, and for how long before you can no longer keep fighting? Armies don't usually stop because they just change their minds. They stop because the numbers stop working. So the question worth holding on to for the next 15 minutes is not how much Russia is losing. That one's easy. The right question is, what would have to be true for Russia to keep going anyway? Russia's original equation, the February 22nd version, wasn't built around losses at all. It was built around speed. In the opening days of the invasion, Russia columns were covering 3,000 to nearly 7,000 meters a day on the drive toward Kyiv, pushing through territory Ukraine hadn't fortified against defenses still scrambling into position. The plan assumed it would take weeks. A lightning advance, a decapitated government, a new map. Russia didn't plan for a long war. It planned to never need one. That assumption, speed as the entire strategy, is domino 1. Because when speed died, everything downstream of it started falling too. And here's what killed it. By the second year of the war, the front had hardened into something no modern army had ever fought through. A kill zone 20 to 40 kilometers deep, saturated with minefields, layered trenches, dragon's teeth barriers, and above all of it, drones. Not squadrons of them, a permanent ceiling of them. By some estimates cited in CSIS research, over 90% of Russian casualties now come from drone strikes rather than soldier-on-soldier combat. Inside that corridor, anything that moves is seen, and most of what is seen is hit within minutes. And you need to understand how Russia is actually attacking that, because it explains everything that follows. The standard Russian tactic, as CSIS describes it, works like this. Small squads of infantry, often poorly trained, are ordered forward toward Ukrainian positions, essentially to conduct reconnaissance by drawing fire. If the defenders reveal themselves, the positions get mapped and hammered with artillery, glide bombs, and FPV drones, and more soldiers get sent in behind. The men walking point in that system are not maneuvering, they're the sensor. Ukrainian forces, meanwhile, generally don't send dismounted infantry into the kill zone at all. They let the machines do the arguing. Hold that asymmetry in your head, because it's about to show up in the numbers. Now watch what that does to speed in just 3 numbers. Around Kostiantinovka, in the first half of 2026, Russian forces averaged roughly 50 meters of advance per day. Towards Slavyansk, about 90. And Pokrovsk, the campaign that Kremlin poured everything into, averaged about 70 meters a day across the entire approach. Roughly 15 kilometers of ground covered between February 2024 and the city's fall in late January 2026. 2 years for just one city. For comparison, at the Battle of the Somme in 1916, the engagement that has been the poster child for military futility for more than a century, Allied forces advanced at roughly 80 meters a day. Meter for meter, the most active axis of the war moved at the speed of 1916. Run the comparison against Russia's own opening act, and it gets worse. The maneuver phases of 2022 moved somewhere between 30 and 100 times faster than the offensives of the past year. Same army, same war, the machine didn't slow down, but the battlefield changed what movement costs. So domino 2, the battlefield stopped rewarding speed and started rewarding endurance. And endurance is survivable. Plenty of armies have won slow wars, as long as the trade stays even. Here, is where 2026 gets strange, though. For most of this war, the casualty exchange between Russia and Ukraine ran somewhere between 2-1 and 3-1. 2 or 3 Russian casualties for every Ukrainian one. Painful, but for a country with more than 3 times Ukraine's population, workable. That was the ledger Moscow was betting on. Then, in the first half of 2026, CSIS assessed that the ratio had climbed to nearly 8-1. 8. We're at domino 3. It didn't happen because Russia suddenly got 3 times sloppier, right? It happened because Ukraine changed the battlefield. Small Russian infiltration squads, often half a dozen men at a time, are being sent across a sensor grid that registers them the moment they move into engagement zones patrolled by machines like the Hornet, which is a one-way attack drone built through a Ukrainian-American partnership and costing about $6,000. It's flying up to 150 kilometers using onboard AI to find, verify, and strike its target, with no satellite link for Russian jammers to cut. A drone that costs less than a used car, methodically dismantling the assaults of a superpower. What Ukraine is running here, in doctrine terms, is a classic air interdiction campaign, the thing air forces have done since the Second World War, except with drones and missiles instead of airplanes. Layered from short-range FPVs over the trench line to long-range strikes deep inside Russia. And in early 2026, Russia's problems compounded from an unexpected direction. SpaceX moved to limit Russian access to Starlink, which, per CSIS, likely worsened Russia's command and control problems on the front at exactly the moment Ukrainian counterattacks were picking up. When your assault squads are the sensors and the communications are degrading, an 8-1 exchange rate stops being a mystery. Okay, now I bet there's something tripping you up right now. Casualty figures are propaganda. Every side lies. And that is true. It's the right objection, and I want you to keep making it, because every side does lie about casualties, which is exactly why serious analysts refuse to accept either side's numbers. The figures we're using are CSIS estimates built from multiple independent streams. Western intelligence assessments, open source confirmation of named dead, hospital and recruitment data. Cross-referenced over 4 years and published as ranges, not gospel. Could the true ratio be 6-1 instead of 8? Sure. Does that change the story you're about to hear? Not even a little bit. Because an 8-1 trade is also survivable if your supply of soldiers is effectively unlimited, which brings us to the number from the start of this video, the one I read twice. Here it is. Through 2026, Russia has been taking between 30,000 and 34,000 casualties every single month. And every month, it's recruiters with record signing bonuses, prison releases, foreign contractors, the entire apparatus, have been bringing in roughly 27,000 new soldiers. Look at those two numbers again. For the first time in this entire war, Russia is likely losing men faster than it can replace them. This isn't just one bad month. It's a trend running through the first half of 2026. And understand what that 27,000 represents, because it's anything but a lazy effort. That is the output of a state pulling every lever it has. Money that would have been life-changing in peacetime, sentence commutations, recruiters working the poorest regions of the country. All of it arriving at a number smaller than the one the front consumes. The crossover happened quietly, with no announcement. Of course, you generally don't announce a thing like that, but it is the single most consequential shift of the war so far, and it's why the professional assessments got noticeably blunter over the summer. Domino 4, the ledger broke. And I want to hand you the frame itself, because you'll reuse it on every war headline you see from now on. Never ask how many an army has lost. Ask what it has lost compared to what it can replace. The ratio is the war. Losses are a scoreboard. Replacement is essentially the fuel gauge. And the scoreboard, for the record, is historic on its own. According to the CSIS data published on July 1st, 2026, Russia has suffered approximately 1.4 million battlefield casualties since February 2022. Killed, wounded, and missing, including as many as 450,000 dead. To put that in a way we can all understand, that's more than 4 times the number of Americans killed in every war the United States has fought since World War II. That's Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf, Iraq, Afghanistan combined. It's 28 times the Soviet death toll from a full decade in Afghanistan, the war that helped bury the Soviet Union. Ukrainian losses are severe as well, an estimated 525 to 625,000 casualties, including as many as 150,000 dead. Combined, this war has now killed, wounded, or left missing more than 2 million people. No commentary belongs on top of that number. If this is the kind of breakdown you want when the next big headline drops, the numbers underneath the noise sourced and straight, subscribe to the domino effect, because the next domino is the one almost nobody saw coming. An army losing men faster than it can replace them can still, in theory, justify the bleed with one thing: ground. So here's what Russia bought with the costliest 6 months of its war. In April and May of 2026, for the first time since August 2024, Russia's territorial holdings in Ukraine shrank. Ukrainian counterattacks near Oleksandrivka and Huloy in the south, and at points along the front from Kharkiv down through Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia, retook more ground than Russian assaults captured. The net result, roughly 400 square kilometers moving the wrong way. So we're on to Domino 5, and it's the one that makes zero sense to me. Russia is now paying the highest monthly price of the entire war for negative territory. Zoom out and the full ledger is bleak in a way no parade can paint over. In total, Russia holds about 118,000 square kilometers of Ukraine, roughly 20% of the country, an area about the size of Pennsylvania. But most of that includes Crimea and the parts of the Donbass taken before 2022. The full-scale invasion itself, 4.5 years of it, has added roughly 75,000 square kilometers, about 12% of Ukraine, in exchange for those 1.4 million casualties. And to feel how frozen this war has become, remember its first spring. At the peak of the initial invasion, Russia seized on the order of 115,000 square kilometers in under 5 weeks. And Ukraine took most of it back within the year. Territory used to move in provinces. It now moves in soccer fields, and lately, in the wrong direction. Even the victories read like warnings. Pokrovsk took 2 years. Kostiantinovka, the next fortress-built city, was declared captured by Russia's defense ministry on July 3, 2026, a claim Ukraine flatly denied, with independent analysts noting that only a few hundred Russian soldiers were assessed to be inside the city at the time, and later reporting describing a contested fight for it street by street. So, Russia is finished, right? The equation is failing on every axis. The end is just a matter of time. We can all log off. That's comfortable to read. I wanted it too, but I'm not going to give that to you. First, yes, the war has come home to Russia in ways the Kremlin spent 4 years insisting it never would. In May 2026, Vladimir Putin dramatically scaled back his own Victory Day parade, the annual armored proof that everything is going to plan, over concerns that Ukrainian long-range strikes could reach it. Sit with that image for a moment. The man whose equation we've been talking about, deciding his own victory celebration was too dangerous to hold at full size in his own capital. We did a video on that one as well. Check it out if you haven't. Moscow and St. Petersburg have been struck by drones and missiles. Ukrainian strikes have reached targets as distant as Ukrainka Air Base, over 6,000 kilometers from Kyiv, and hit refineries hard enough to cause gasoline shortages in parts of Russia, while CSIS assesses that the campaign has largely knocked Russia's navy out of the war. Crimea has been hit hard enough to close beaches and summer camps and knock out power. Ordinary Russians are absorbing higher prices, new taxes, internet restrictions, and an economy that CSIS describes as in genuine distress. But before anyone starts drafting the victory speech, look at the other side of the same report. Russia is imposing brutal costs of its own. Russian drones and missiles keep exploiting the one shortage Ukraine cannot fix on its own: air defense interceptors. A Ukrainian Air Force spokesman put it like this: a goalkeeper standing in goal with 10 balls flying at him at once. He catches as many as he has hands and feet. And Russia keeps adapting on the battlefield. Its Rubicon drone warfare unit has been effective at hunting Ukrainian drone operators, destroying rear units and cutting supply lines. This is not a finished army. It's a wounded one, and those are different things. But yet the same report that documented every number in this video is blunt about what the numbers do not say. Russia's manpower pool is still deep. Its war economy is strained, but it hasn't buckled. Ukraine's strike campaign disrupts the Russian war machine, but it doesn't cripple it. And the defensive advantage that is slaughtering Russian assaults cut both ways. It makes it just as hard for Ukraine to sweep its own territory back. If you're thinking the recruitment crossover means the front collapses by winter, I thought about that scenario too. But the evidence refuses to support it. A deficit like this degrades an army slowly. Thinner units, older soldiers, exhausted rotations, and worse training. The numbers say Russia is losing, but they do not say Russia is stopping. Those are different, and confusing them is how smart people have called this war wrong for 4.5 years. Which brings us to our final domino, the variable that makes the whole equation balance, and the reason it was never going to be found on a battlefield map. Every model that says Russia must stop assumes the decision maker responds to costs the way a general or a finance minister would. But this equation has exactly one variable that matters, and it's a man. Vladimir Putin has given no public indication that he intends to slow down. That is CSIS's assessment, not our guess. And as long as he remains willing to pay, Russia can keep converting its population and its economy into 50 meters a day. So, domino 6. The equation makes zero sense as military math. Since World War II, roughly 30% of interstate wars have ended in a ceasefire, about 21% in battlefield victory, and 16% in a peace agreement. On the evidence of everything you've just seen, this war is overwhelmingly likely to end at a table. And what brings Moscow to that table is not persuasion, it's price. The levers that raise the price are the unglamorous ones. Enforcement against the shadow fleet of tankers still funding the Kremlin's budget, air defense that keeps Ukraine's cities standing, and that recruitment gap, several thousand men a month, compounding quietly in the background. So I guess Russia's war equation doesn't make zero sense. It made sense the whole time. We were just told the wrong variable was in charge. The dominoes fell in order. A plan built on speed, the death of speed, a broken exchange rate, a broken ledger, a shrinking map, and behind all of it, a single hand deciding month after month that the price is still acceptable. I can't tell you when that changes, because nobody can. What I can tell you is the number we'll be watching into fall. The gap between what Russia loses and what it recruits. If that gap widens, every other number in this video accelerates. So here's my question for you, and genuinely, I do read the comments. Which moves first, Russia's recruitment gap or the West's willingness to raise the price? Make up your case. Subscribe if you want the follow-up when these numbers shift, and I'll see you when the next domino falls.